Today we're going to cook up a walking bass line for a jazz blues in the key of F. When we're done, you'll know more about how bass players whip one up on the spot in an improvisational way. While this is coming from a bass player's point of view, my hope is that you'll see a way to practice improvising on your own instrument, whatever it may be. Let's take a look at the ingredients that we'll need for our recipe. For our F blues, we're going to start with something you all probably have on hand, the F major scale, with its 1 flat, B flat. But because it's the blues, we're going to make one little substitution. We're going to switch out the major 7 for a flat 7. It's just more bluesy that way. The blues calls for a 12-bar repeating pattern that will be familiar to you. We'll use a jazzy variation on the traditional 1-4-5, or in this case, F, B flat, C progression, and we'll go to the 2 minor chord, G minor, in bar 9. Now, if all of that got confusing, don't worry. I'll cover that in more detail in just a minute. We'll hit 4 main target notes to play the changes in bar 1, bar 5, bar 9, and bar 10. Finally, we'll play a 2-bar jazz turnaround called a 6-2-5-1, and that's it. The home base of our blues is really the F7 chord, also known as the F dominant 7, or more awkwardly, the F major minor 7. The notes in the chord are the major triad plus the minor 7. Another way to think of this that is helpful for woodwind and brass players who may be playing solos, or jazz cats say blowing over the changes, is that you really only need to remember one scale, and it's this one, a slight variation of the major scale called the F mixolydian. I'll leave the exploration of modes of the major scale for a later topic. For now, though, you can think of just making little melodies for your solo out of the F major scale, but with the flat 7 instead of the major 7. Some of you might be wondering, but what about the blues scale? Sure thing. If you have one handy, just throw that flat 5 in there and you're good to go. Now let's start thinking about our steps to creating an improvised bass line for an F blues. Here are 2 ways to visualize the chord progressions or changes for an F blues. We're starting off simple here. Now, on the left, you see a simple chart that breaks down the 12-part progression and shows the changes for each measure. This format is sometimes called a lead sheet, and it usually has a little more information than I have here, but not much more sometimes. On the right, we see the same progression, but I'm writing it with the Roman numerals to indicate the scale degrees. This helps to show how this same structure works in any key we might choose and not just the key of F. There are a couple of things to note here. First, look at all those dominant 7th chords. Now you see why we made such a big deal about the flat 7 and specified the mixolydian scale. The other thing to note is that a jazz-flavored blues typically includes a few important variations to what we might call the delta blues or a rock blues progression, which can be just a 1-4-5. The jazz version wants that 2-5 in the last 4 bars in order to sound, well, jazzy. Also, our extra credit here. Note how we're writing some of the chord symbols with lowercase? The G minor and also the D7, the 6th chord in the turn. That's to signal the quality of the chord is minor. So we would use the minor 3rd if we're playing that chord tone or melodic note. Why do we do that? It has to do with another interesting topic that we'll leave for another time called chord scales. But the gist is that we can pair each note of the major scale with its own chord. And just like the pattern of the major scale helps us build one in any key, if we go whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, we can build a chord scale in any key by going major, minor, minor, major, dominant, minor, half diminished. It's a stable pattern that is very useful, especially for the bass in situations like an improvised walking line. If you know the scale degree for a chord in a progression based on the key, we can infer the quality of the chord, and we'll have the proper chord tones under our fingers. Okay, now we're getting to what a bass player is really hearing and feeling in an improvised walking line. Most important of all, we need to signal the changes. That's our main job as the bass player, and we're often the only voice doing it when another voice is taking a solo over the progression. That means that in a few key moments in the progression, we need to play a note that signals to the band where we are in that 12-bar cycle. Here, I've circled where those cannot miss notes, we'll call them target notes, are. Even if we don't have any written charts, these might as well be set in stone, because without the bass playing them, the bass player is not really doing their job. Most of them come on the downbeat of the measure where we have a chord change, so the 1. Note that on the 1 and 3, we are playing chord tones or notes from the major or minor triad of the harmony. On 2 and 4, we can do that as well, but when we want the line to swing, we're usually playing chromatic notes on those beats. A good deal of the time, the bass player wants to play the root note of the chord as the target. Now that's not always true. All these rules, of course, are flexible. It's jazz after all, and rules are made to be broken. But you need to play the root a lot. Not too often can you go away from it, because it's really about keeping the band on track. And so it's a little like saying something unexpected every single time you would speak in a conversation. It can work once in a while, but if you do it all the time, people lose the thread of the dialogue. I talked earlier about the 2-5, and for this bass line, it's a really important part of jazz vocabulary. If you aren't doing the 2-5 here, you might be playing the blues, but jazz cats will hear you playing more roots or rock blues without it. The drop down to the 2 minor in bar 9 is especially important because it's a super clear signal that we are playing jazz. And then the 1-6-2-5 turn just makes it all the more unmistakable. Where does this come from? Why is this jazzy? Well, jazz players have a tradition of taking popular music and reharmonizing it, changing up the rhythm, improvising over the changes. The 2-5-1 is and was a super recognizable progression in Western harmony generally, and in popular music like show tunes and the songs we now associate with the, quote, American songbook that early jazz players adapted to create what we now recognize as jazz standards. 2-5-1 creates a pleasing tension and release, a movement that resolves in a satisfying way to the Western musical ear. In music theory, we call this kind of sequence that repeats across many songs and different types of music a cadence. And this particular cadence moves from the supertonic, the 2 chord, to the dominant, the 5, to resolve to the 1, or the tonic. So with 2-5 being mandatory or highly recommended for making jazz hands, along with target notes being essential, the improvisational choices we're making here productively narrow if we want to be part of this particular conversation, which is a jazz blues in F. But we aren't done with those conventions. Another important one for playing the blues, and for this flavor of blues, is the turnaround. The function of this phrase is to tell the band, hey, we're coming to the end of our 12-bar sequence and we're going to start again at bar 1 after that. Or, depending on how we play the turn, we might be saying, hey, it's time to wrap it up and end the tune. The top of the progression is important as a milestone for all sorts of reasons. It might let the soloists know when it's another player's turn to take the lead. It might tell the ensemble when to play in unison or when to rest. The turn is usually signaled with a change in how far apart the chord changes are. Without changing tempo, the band plays more changes per measure at the end of that 12-bar phrase. Sonically, it sounds to me like a kind of overview or a reprise of the changes we've just done. Like you are repeating it for emphasis, maybe something that was just said in the conversation. And in a jazz blues, we'll want that repeated bit to emphasize the 2-5. Here I've chosen the 1-6-2-5 because all by itself it's an important bit of jazz vocabulary for a bass player. The reason why will be a little more obvious when we talk about the final constraint on our improvisational choices, which are approach notes, or the leading tones, as they're sometimes called. Approach notes, or leading tones in a walking bass line, come just before our target notes, and they are almost always chromatic. That is, they are a half step away from the target note. They can come from above and step down to the target, or they can come from below and step up. The choice is an important improvisational one for making a bass line sound fresh and less repetitive. You would want to mix it up and not play all of your approach notes from the same direction and from one trip around the progression to the next. Maybe you would want to vary the direction of your approaches then as well. Check out the turnaround here. What do you notice? With 2 changes per bar, the structure of the 1-6-2-5 is really just alternating target, approach, target, approach. For that reason, the mix of up-down movement here is important, and it forms an important aspect of bass vocabulary. Introducing new mixes of approach and targets here is a challenge, but it's a fun puzzle that can get some grins on the bandstand when you do it, either in a familiar or an unexpected and new way. Okay, so let's review our recipe. What does it really mean to do an improvised walking bass line for a jazz, blues, and F? There are at least 4 things we really have to do every time through the 12 bars that I've listed here. We have to hit our target notes to signal the changes. We have to get those 2 5s in there on bar 9 and in the turn especially. We need to move with purpose into the targets with our chromatic approach notes. So what does that leave us in terms of free choice and improvisation? Well, we have the most freedom in bars 2 through 4, where the band is mostly sticking with the 1 chord or variations on the 1. Our choices there should mostly be chord tones of some type with leading tones into the chord tones. So for an F7, we're talking about chord tones of F, A, C, E flat, or the 1, 3, 5, and then the all-important flat 7. We can and should move stepwise and into each of these tones, right, with chromatic approach notes, or else it will sound like we're playing arpeggios or some kind of practice etude rather than a walking bass line. So when it comes down to it, we have a lot of structure here to guide our choices. And each time around the progression, we are trying to solve the same basic puzzle with the same constraints, just in a new way. Often, there are very subtle variations that are akin to making clever, responsive contributions to the conversation that we're having with the rest of the band. Often, too, those are in response to something one of the other players has just played. Once these elements become familiar and comfortable, you can do them without thinking explicitly about them. And you learn to just listen and respond, just like we do in improvised conversation. That's when the magic of improvisation really takes hold. In that situation, the shared structure and vocabulary meld together to keep everyone in the same conceptual place. Then it's just a matter of the different roles in the ensemble doing what they're expected most of the time and making spontaneous improvisational choices whenever they see a chance. And now we're cooking. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about what goes on, for a bass player at least, when we're thinking about improvising a walking blues in F. Along with this video, I've prepared a few resources for you, including a sample bass line that you can look at in notation and some backing tracks so you can hear and play along with a jazz blues progression of your own. I hope you enjoy. Thanks.